The sound of the doorbell echoed through the empty house. Maria stood frozen, her heart racing as she stared at the envelope in her hand. It was from the millionaire, the man who had promised her a life-changing opportunity, an opportunity she couldn't afford to refuse. But the offer was like no other she had ever received. She glanced over at her son, asleep on the couch, his small chest rising and falling with each breath. He had no idea what his mother was about to do, no idea that in order to secure his future, she would have to make an unimaginable sacrifice. As the door creaked open, the man stepped inside, his presence commanding, his eyes cold and calculating. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice low. Maria nodded, but inside, she was trembling. What had she gotten herself into? "Come in," she whispered, her voice barely audible. She motioned for him to enter, and as he crossed the threshold, the tension in the room seemed to double. His expensive suit, sharp and well-tailored, barely shifted as he moved. Every inch of him exuded wealth, power, and control. She led him to the small living room, where she had prepared everything he requested. The stark white walls, the cold wooden floor, the dim light from the single lamp in the corner, it all felt so sterile, so clinical, so unnatural. "Everything is ready," she said, her throat dry as she spoke the words she never thought she'd utter. "Good." His eyes scanned the room, taking in every detail, his gaze briefly lingering on the photo of her son on the mantel. "You know why you're here, don't you?" Maria's heart pounded. She wanted to refuse, to scream, but the fear of what would happen if she did kept her frozen. "Yes, I know." It all started when Maria's son, Leo, had been diagnosed with a rare and potentially deadly illness. The medical bills had piled up quickly, and despite her best efforts, Maria couldn't keep up. She had sold her jewelry, her clothes, and even her car. But still, it wasn't enough. She had heard about the millionaire through an online ad, one of those strange, mysterious ones that promised solutions to desperate people. "Do anything for your child. I will help you." It was a simple message, but it spoke to her in a way that nothing else had. Desperate times called for desperate measures, and so Maria had reached out. When the man arrived at her door a week ago, he made his offer clear. "I can make your son healthy. I have the resources, the connections. But you must be willing to do something for me in return." At first, Maria had laughed it off. What could he possibly want from a single mother like her? But then he told her the truth. "I need you to bathe me." The absurdity of the request had left her speechless. Bathe him, a grown man, a millionaire. But he had been insistent. "Do this, and I'll cover all of Leo's medical bills, for life." The offer was tempting, impossible to ignore. Leo's health had been deteriorating rapidly. Every doctor's visit seemed to bring worse news. She couldn't let her son die. She couldn't. And so, despite the humiliation, despite the gut-wrenching discomfort, Maria had agreed. The money, the health care, the security for her son's future, everything depended on this one act. "Is Leo asleep?" The man's voice broke her from her thoughts. Maria nodded, unsure of what to say next. "Good," he said, his tone colder now. "We don't want him to see any of this." Maria's throat tightened as she fought back tears. How had she gotten to this point? A part of her wanted to run, to pack up Leo and disappear. But she couldn't. She had already made the decision. And there was no turning back now. With a quiet nod, she turned and walked toward the small bathroom. She could hear his footsteps behind her, steady and deliberate. She tried to ignore the growing dread in her chest, the nausea that had been building ever since he made the request. The bathroom was simple, no frills, just a small tub, a mirror, and a set of towels that had been carefully arranged on the rack. Maria motioned for him to sit on the edge of the tub, her hands trembling as she set the envelope down on the counter. She turned the water on, feeling the steam rise as it filled the air. As she stood there, her back to him, she tried to steady her breathing. This is for Leo, she reminded herself. This is for Leo. She glanced at the mirror at her reflection. The woman staring back at her was a stranger, no longer the young woman who had dreamed of a better life for her son. She was someone else now, someone who had been pushed to the edge by desperation, by fear. The sound of fabric rustling broke her reverie, and Maria's heart skipped a beat. She turned around, her eyes briefly meeting his as he began to undress. His eyes were unreadable, distant. She felt a pang of disgust, but she quickly swallowed it down. There was no room for emotions right now. Focus, she told herself. For Leo. When? He was finally in the tub. She hesitated for only a moment before stepping forward. Her hands moved almost mechanically, taking the sponge and dipping it into the warm water. She began to scrub his shoulders, her eyes fixed firmly on the porcelain. Tiles ahead of her. Her mind raced, her heart ached, but she kept her movements steady, trying to block out the reality of what was happening. And then, unexpectedly, he spoke. "You know," he began, his voice low, "I didn't think you'd agree." Maria froze, the sponge still in her hand. She didn't dare look up. "Most people would run," he continued, "but you're different. You're a survivor." His words sent a chill down her spine. She didn't know if it was a compliment or a threat. She didn't know if he was testing her, pushing her, or something else entirely. "I'm doing this for my son," Maria said quietly, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her. "Nothing else matters." For a moment there was silence. Then he leaned back in the tub, his eyes closing as if in deep thought. Maria took a deep breath and continued her task, trying to focus on anything but him. Minutes passed like hours, each second stretching endlessly, as if time itself were mocking her. Every splash of water, every shift in his position made her stomach churn. And then, just as she thought she might burst from the tension, he spoke again. "You don't have to do this," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Maria's heart skipped a beat. Was this it? Was he going to back out now? Was there still a chance to escape? "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice cracking slightly despite herself. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he opened his eyes and looked directly at her. For the first time, Maria saw something in his eyes, something deeper than just cold calculation. Was it regret, guilt, or was it just manipulation? "I didn't expect to feel this," he said softly. "Maybe I underestimated you." Maria's grip on the sponge tightened. Was he trying to pull her into his world, to make her question her decision? But she couldn't afford to think too deeply. She had a son to save. She forced herself to focus on the task at hand. The bath would end soon, and with it everything would change, for better or for worse. She had no idea what was coming next. Maria tried not to look at him, but her eyes betrayed her. Every motion, every subtle shift in his body sent her heart into overdrive. The silence between them had stretched too long, too thick. Her hands trembled slightly as she continued to run the sponge over his back, trying desperately to focus on the task at hand. The water in the tub sloshed gently, the only sound filling the quiet room. She took another breath, trying to steady herself. Focus, she reminded herself, for Leo. That's all that mattered now. He shifted again, this time leaning back against the tub, his eyes still closed. Maria couldn't help but notice the way his sharp features seemed to soften in the water. Despite herself, she felt a strange curiosity stir within her. This man, this millionaire who had turned her world upside down, was just a man, vulnerable, like everyone else. And yet, she felt nothing but repulsion as she continued her work. Suddenly, he opened his eyes and looked directly at her. It was a sharp gaze, full of questions, full of something else, something deeper than just the cold, calculating businessman she had seen at the door. The vulnerability in his eyes startled her, and for a moment, she faltered. "You don't have to do this, Maria," he said again, his voice softer this time. You could walk away right now. We could end all of this, you and Leo. I could still help you." The words hung in the air between them like a heavy fog. Maria froze, her breath catching in her throat. What was he offering her now? A way out? Had he realized the discomfort, the fear in her, or was this just another game, another manipulation to test her resolve? She shook her head slightly, forcing the thoughts away. "I can't," she replied, her voice low but firm. "This is the only way, and I'm not backing out now." He studied her for a long moment, as if weighing her words. Finally, he leaned back, letting the water cover his shoulders as he closed his eyes once more. Maria felt a cold chill creeping into the room, but she couldn't tell if it was from the water or from the unnerving presence he exuded. For the next few minutes, there was only the sound of water splashing and the faint hum of the light above. Maria's mind was racing. Every part of her wanted to break down, to cry out, to ask him why he had made her do this, why this was the price for her son's future. But she couldn't. She had made her choice, and now she had to live with it. She finished the bath in silence, each stroke of the sponge feeling like a weight on her soul. When she finally reached for the towel, he didn't speak, but she could sense his eyes on her. She didn't look up as she wrapped the towel around his shoulders, helping him rise. From the tub, she focused on the task, trying to hold on to the last shred of control she had left. As he stepped out of the tub, the steam surrounding him gave him an almost ethereal quality. For a moment, Maria couldn't help but wonder who this man really was. The millionaire who had the power to change lives. Did he feel anything at all, or was this just another cold transaction in a long line of deals? "Thank you," he said suddenly, breaking the silence. His voice was low, almost too soft for the man she had met earlier. "You've done more than I ever expected. I'm impressed." Maria didn't respond. She didn't know what to say. She couldn't allow herself to feel anything. To feel gratitude or disgust, to acknowledge the strange tenderness in his voice. It would make the whole situation worse. She quickly turned and began to dry the towels, avoiding looking at him as he dressed in the clothes she had set out for him. As she folded the towels, she tried to keep her hands steady. But the truth was, she was falling apart inside. Every thought was a tangled mess, every decision now weighed down by the guilt of what she had just done. When she finished, she turned to face him, only to find him standing by the window, looking out at the darkened street. He seemed lost in thought. For the first time, she saw something unfamiliar behind his usual facade. Was it regret? Was it loneliness? Or was it just another manipulation? "I have a proposition for you," he said after a long silence, still facing the window. Maria didn't answer right away, not sure if she wanted to hear what he had to say. She had already given so much, her dignity, her pride, and now her peace of mind. What more could he possibly want? But she didn't have a choice. "What is it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "You're in deeper than you realize, Maria," he said. "You've made a deal with me, but that's not the end of it. I want you to work with me, long term." Maria's heart skipped a beat. Work with him? Hadn't she already crossed the line? Hadn't she already given up everything? What more could he possibly ask? "I don't understand," she replied slowly, the words tasting bitter on her tongue. "What are you asking me to do?" He walked toward her, his footsteps silent on the hardwood floor. "I've been in the business world for a long time, Maria," he said, his voice dark and steady. "But I'm starting to think I need someone like you by my side, someone with a unique perspective." Maria's mind raced. She felt trapped, cornered. Her son's health was still at risk, and now this man, this stranger, was offering her something she couldn't comprehend. But the fear in her gut told her that this wasn't just an opportunity. It was another test, a way to pull her further into his world, a world she had no place in, a world where she could easily lose herself. "Why me?" she asked, trying to hide the tremble in her voice. His gaze softened slightly, but there was no warmth in it. "Because you're strong. You've already proven that. You'll do anything to save your son, and that's what I need in a partner. Someone who isn't afraid to make sacrifices." The words cut through her like a knife. Sacrifices. Hadn't she already made enough of them? Was there no end to what he would demand from her? "I'm not your partner," she said sharply, her voice stronger than she felt. "I've done what you asked, and I've kept my end of the bargain. I want nothing more from you." The smile that tugged at the corner of his lips didn't reach his eyes. "I'm afraid that's not entirely up to you, Maria." His words hung in the air, thick with a promise she couldn't ignore. Whatever this was, whatever game he was playing, it was far from over. As he turned to leave, he paused at the door and looked back at her. "Think about my offer," he said quietly. "I'll be in touch." Maria didn't move. She couldn't. She watched him leave, her mind racing, her emotions a tangled mess. She had made her choice. She had done the unthinkable, and now there was no turning back. As the door closed behind him, Maria felt a strange sense of finality. It wasn't relief, it wasn't peace, it was something darker. The beginning of a nightmare she wasn't sure she could escape from. But there was one thing she knew for certain. Whatever came next, she had to protect Leo. She had to hold on to the one thing that mattered, and she would do anything to keep him safe, even if it meant losing herself in the process. Maria couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw his face, the millionaire, his cold, calculating gaze, and the way he had spoken to her, like she was nothing more than a tool to be used for his benefit. But even now, after he had left, his presence lingered, thick and suffocating, like the steam that had filled the bathroom earlier. She turned over on her side, glancing at Leo, still sound asleep on the couch. The sight of him, so innocent and unaware of the darkness surrounding them, made her heart ache. He was the reason she had done this, the reason she had made that impossible decision. But every part of her was beginning to regret it. The offer, the proposition, the $1 million promise for her son's health in exchange for her own soul. It wasn't supposed to be like this. She had thought it was a one-time deal, a momentary lapse in judgment. But now it felt like she had crossed a line, one that had no end, no way back. She had promised herself she wouldn't fall into his trap, that she wouldn't let him control her. But each time she saw Leo's face, the worry returned. The fear, the gnawing anxiety that she was running out of time, that if she didn't do whatever it took to save him, she would lose him forever. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. She jumped, startled, and reached for it. A message from the millionaire. Her stomach twisted as she read the text. "I trust you've had time to think about my offer. Let me know your decision by tomorrow. I'm waiting." That was it. No pleasantries, no explanation. Just an ultimatum. Maria stared at the screen for a long time, her finger hovering over the reply button. What could she possibly say? There was no way to turn back now. He was right. She was already too deep into this world. But she wasn't sure if she was ready to become a part of it. She closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. The weight of it all pressed down on her chest, suffocating her. How had her life come to this? How had she gone from being a hopeful mother, working hard to provide for her son, to being a pawn in a rich man's twisted game? The phone buzzed again, this time with a call. It was from an unknown number. Hesitantly, she answered. "Maria," came the voice on the other end. It was low, familiar, and unsettling. "I see you've received my message." "Please," she said, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to remain calm. "I need time. I can't make a decision just like that." "You don't have time," he replied, his tone as cold and smooth as ever. Already made a decision the moment you agreed to meet me. This is your chance to secure your son's future. Don't waste it." Maria's heart raced. She wanted to scream, to lash out at him, but she couldn't. He held all the cards. He was in control, and she was nothing more than a desperate mother, clinging to whatever hope she could find. "Tomorrow, Maria," he said again, more insistent now. "I'll be waiting. Don't make me come to you again." The line went dead. She sat there in the darkness, her mind spinning. What was she supposed to do? She had promised herself that she would protect Leo at all costs, but at what price? How much more of herself could she give before she was completely lost? The night stretched on, and Maria found herself pacing back and forth, unable to stop her thoughts from racing. Every time she thought about the man's offer, the more disgusted she felt. But then she thought about Leo's smile, his laughter, his small, fragile form. She thought about the way he looked at her, trusting her to make everything better. And that fear, that terror gripped her once more. What if she couldn't make him better? What if she failed? The next morning came too quickly. Maria hadn't slept a wink, but she knew she couldn't afford to waste any more time. The message, the phone call, it all weighed on her like an anvil. She needed to make a choice that would decide her fate and her son's. She opened the kitchen drawer and took out a pen. The ink gleamed in the morning light, mocking her hesitation. She picked up her phone, opened the message thread from the millionaire, and began to type her response. "I'll do it." Her thumb hovered over the send button for a moment, and then, with a deep breath, she pressed it. The decision was made. Within minutes, her phone rang again. This time, there was no hesitation in the voice on the other end. "Good, I'll see you soon. Prepare yourself." Maria's stomach churned as she put the phone down. She had made the deal. She had agreed to whatever he wanted. But she couldn't shake the feeling that there was something worse waiting for her on the other side. She spent the next few hours cleaning, preparing her home for whatever was coming next. She tried not to think about what she had just agreed to, but her mind kept drifting back to the thought of Leo. Would this be enough? The doorbell rang just after lunch. Her heart leapt into her throat, and she almost didn't answer it. But she had no choice. She had already made the decision. She opened the door, and there he stood, the millionaire. This time he didn't wait for an invitation. He walked in, his eyes scanning the room before settling on her. His cold, calculating gaze made her feel small, insignificant, as if she were just another item on his checklist. "Another thing to be crossed off. Ready?" he asked, his voice clipped and firm. There was no warmth, no kindness in his words. Maria nodded, her throat tight. "What do you want me to do?" He studied her for a moment, and then, without another word, he took off his coat and walked toward the small table she had set up in the corner. His eyes locked onto hers, and for a fleeting second she saw something dark and unsettling. "First," he said, "you're going to need to trust me." Maria felt the blood drain from her face. Trust him, after everything. But she nodded. What else could she do? He was in control now. She had nothing left to lose. As she followed him through the house, every step felt heavier than the last. Her mind screamed at her to stop, to run, but she couldn't. The weight of the decision she had made was pressing down on her chest, making it harder to breathe. She had no choice but to go along with whatever twisted plan he had for her. The hours dragged on, filled with silence, with awkward moments that seemed to stretch on forever. Maria didn't know what to expect, but she knew it wasn't going to be anything good. The fear gnawed at her, the sense that she had lost herself forever. And then, as the evening wore on, the first of the true revelations came. "Tonight is the beginning of something much bigger than you can imagine," he said, as they stood in the dim light of her living room, his voice low and smooth. Maria looked at him, unsure of what to say. Her throat was dry, her hands trembling. "Don't worry," he added with a cruel smile. "You'll understand soon enough." Maria's heart raced as she followed the millionaire through the cold, dimly lit hallway. The sound of her own footsteps seemed to echo in the stillness, each step heavy with the weight of what she had agreed to. Her mind felt foggy, almost detached, as if she were walking through a dream or perhaps a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. He led her to a small, sterile room at the back of the house. The walls were bare, except for a single painting of a distant, stormy ocean, a strange contrast to the otherwise cold, clinical atmosphere. The room was filled with expensive furniture, but it felt impersonal, as if it were meant for something else entirely. "Sit," he commanded, his tone devoid of any warmth. Maria obeyed without question, taking a seat on the leather chair placed in front of a large desk. Her hands were clenched in her lap, her fingers trembling as she tried to steady her nerves. She felt small, insignificant, in this place, just another pawn in a game she didn't understand. The millionaire, whose name she still hadn't learned, sat across from her. His sharp features were illuminated by the soft light of a desk lamp, casting shadows across his face. His eyes, cold and calculating, never left hers. "You've made the right decision, Maria," he said, his voice smooth, almost reassuring. "You'll see, everything will work out. All you need to do is follow through." Maria wanted to ask questions, to demand answers, but the fear that had taken hold of her throat silenced her. Every part of her screamed to walk away, to find another way to save Leo, but she couldn't. She had crossed this line, and now there was no turning back. "Why are you doing this?" she finally whispered, her voice trembling. "What do you want from me?" He leaned back in his chair, studying her for a long moment before answering. "What do I want from you?" he repeated, as if the question amused him. "You should know by now, Maria. I want what I've always wanted, control, power, and I need someone who understands that, who is willing to sacrifice to get it." Maria's stomach churned at his words. Sacrifice. It was the word that haunted her, the word that had driven her to this point. But now, as she sat there, listening to him speak, she realized how much she didn't know. What kind of man was he, and what had she truly agreed to? "I've given you a chance," he continued, his eyes never leaving hers. "You've done what I asked, and now you will be rewarded. But there's more to this, much more. And you'll have to prove yourself, just like everyone else who's been in your position." Maria felt a chill run down her spine. Prove myself? What did that mean? And who were these other people he spoke of? She had no answers, no understanding of what was happening. All she knew was that she had made a deal that seemed to grow darker with each passing moment. The millionaire stood up suddenly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Come with me," he ordered, turning toward the door without waiting for a response. Maria hesitated for a moment, the tension in the air suffocating her. She didn't want to follow him, didn't want to face whatever awaited her next, but she had no choice. She stood up slowly, her legs shaky, and walked behind him as he led her down another hallway, this one even darker than the last. They stopped in front of a door at the end of the hall. He turned to her, his expression unreadable. "This is where it begins," he said softly, almost as if speaking to himself. "You've been given the opportunity. Now you have to prove that you're worth it." Maria's breath caught in her throat. What was this? What kind of game was he playing? Before she could ask, he opened the door and stepped inside, motioning for her to follow. As she entered, she was hit by the overwhelming scent of antiseptic and cold metal. The room was sterile, almost surgical in its design. There were machines everywhere, their blinking lights casting an eerie glow against the white walls. And in the center of the room, lying on an operating table, was a man. His face was obscured by a mask, but his body was covered with electrodes and wires. He looked almost lifeless, his chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. Maria froze. In place, her heart pounding in her chest. "What is this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The millionaire turned to her, his eyes gleaming with something dark and unsettling. "This," he said slowly, "is the future. This is what you're here for." Maria didn't understand. Her mind struggled to comprehend what she was seeing. I don't know what you mean." He walked toward the table, running, a hand over the man's body, his fingers brushing the wires and machines. "This man," he said, his voice low and almost reverent, "is part of something much bigger. A project, if you will. And you, Maria, are going to help me complete it." Maria's pulse quickened. Her hands felt clammy, her stomach twisted with fear. "I don't want to be involved in this. I didn't agree to this." He turned to her, his eyes cold and emotionless. "You've already agreed to more than you realize. Everything you've done up to this point has led to this moment. You don't have a choice now." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Maria's mind spun as she tried to process what he was saying. She had known, deep down, that the price of saving Leah was more than just a bath, but this was something entirely different. "Is he dead?" she asked, her voice barely audible. The millionaire smiled, a cold, cruel smile. "Not yet, but he will be soon. And when he is, that's when we move on to the next step. We need someone who understands what it means to sacrifice, someone who isn't afraid to do whatever it takes to succeed." Maria's legs felt like they were giving way beneath her. She wanted to run, to scream, but she couldn't move, she couldn't breathe. "This is what you've signed up for, Maria," the millionaire said, his voice soft but deadly. "This is your test. Prove to me that you're worthy. Prove to me that you'll do what's necessary, and then you'll have everything you've ever wanted." Everything she had ever wanted. The thought made her sick. What had she signed up for? What had she agreed to? And most of all, what would she have to sacrifice next? The millionaire turned away from her, his back to her, as he began to adjust the machines. "You'll stay here," he said. "I have a few things to take care of. You'll know what to do when the time comes." Maria felt her knees go weak, but she forced herself to stay upright. She couldn't think. She couldn't process what was happening. The man on the table, the machines, the cold, clinical atmosphere, it all felt like a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. As the millionaire left the room, Maria stood there in the sterile silence, her mind racing, her heart pounded in her chest. The weight of the decision she had made crushed her. She had known that she was stepping into something dangerous, but this was beyond anything she had imagined. She looked down at the man on the table, his shallow breaths the only sound in the room. She didn't know if he was alive or dead, but it didn't matter. She was no longer in control. The millionaire had taken that from her, and now she was just a pawn in his twisted game. The door closed behind her with a soft click, and Maria was left alone with the darkness, the machines, and the growing realization that there was no going back. Whatever came next, she would have to face it. She had no choice. Maria stood in the sterile, cold room, her body frozen in place. The machines hummed softly, their blinking lights casting eerie shadows on the walls. The man on the operating table, who she had never seen before, yet felt strangely connected to, lay unconscious, his body a tangled mess of wires and electrodes. She could feel the weight of his life, hanging by the thinnest of threads, his survival depending on decisions she wasn't ready to make. She had tried to stay calm. She had tried to keep her emotions in check. But it was impossible now. The situation had escalated beyond anything she could have imagined. She had walked into a nightmare, and it was one she couldn't wake up from. The millionaire had left her here, alone, with the unconscious man and the machines that surrounded him. His words echoed in her mind. "This is your test. Prove to me that you're worthy. Prove to me that you'll do what's necessary." What did he mean by that? What had she agreed to? She had no answers, just an overwhelming sense of dread that threatened to consume her. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, jolting her out of her thoughts. She fumbled to pull it out, her hands shaking. It was a message from the millionaire. 3. Time is now, Maria. If you want your son's future, you must act. Her heart hammered in her chest. She had already given so much, her dignity, her sense of right and wrong, her peace of mind. But now, this was something else. She didn't understand what was happening. What kind of man was he? What did he want from her? She glanced back at the man on the table. His face was obscured by a mask, but there was something haunting about his stillness. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was complicit in something dark, something that would change her forever. Another message came through, the words stark and urgent. This man's life is in your hands. He's the key to everything. If you want to save your son, you need to make a choice now. There's no going back. Maria stared at the screen, her mind whirling. Save Leo. That was the only thing that mattered. But at what cost? What had she agreed to? She felt trapped, caught between the man she had promised herself she would never become and the desperate need to protect her son. Her heart ached as she thought about Leo, his smiling face, his innocent eyes. She would do anything for him. Anything. But she didn't know how far she could go before she lost herself completely. The door to the room creaked open, and she turned to see the millionaire standing in the doorway. His expression was unreadable, his eyes cold and calculating. As always, you've had enough time, he said, his voice smooth and businesslike. The decision is yours, Maria. I'm waiting. Maria's stomach churned. She wanted to scream, to tell him that she couldn't do this, that she couldn't be a part of whatever twisted plan he had. But her voice caught in her throat. She had made a deal. She had already sacrificed so much. Could she really walk away now? I don't understand, she whispered, her voice barely audible. What do you want me to do? The millionaire walked toward her, his steps measured and deliberate. It's simple, he said. This man, he gestured toward the unconscious figure on the table, is part of something much larger than you can imagine. He's the key to a new world, one where you and your son can live without fear, without worry. But you have to prove your worth. You have to show me that you're ready to take the next step. Maria felt a chill run down her spine. The next step? What did that mean? And why did this feel so wrong? I've already done what you asked, she said, her voice shaky but determined. I've sacrificed everything for my son. What more do you want from me? The millionaire's lips curled into a small smile, but it was a smile that didn't reach his eyes. You haven't sacrificed everything yet, not until you've crossed the final line. Maria's heart stopped. The final line? What was he talking about? Before she could ask, he turned away and began to adjust the machines, his movements methodical and calm. She watched him for a moment, her heart pounding in her chest. Every instinct screamed at her to leave, to take Leo and run, but her feet were rooted to the floor. She couldn't move. She was paralyzed by fear, by confusion, by the weight of the choice she had to make. Tell me what to do, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Tell me what I need to do. The millionaire looked up from the machine, his eyes narrowing. You know what to do, Maria. You just have to decide if you're willing to do it. She felt her knees weaken, but she remained standing. The fear that had gripped her so tightly was beginning to dissolve, replaced by a cold sense of clarity. She didn't know what was happening here, but she knew one thing for sure. Her son's life depended on this. With trembling hands, she took a step toward the table, her gaze falling on the man who was hooked up to the machines. He was breathing, but only just. His life hung in the balance, just as her future did. Do it, the millionaire's voice broke through her thoughts. Make the choice. Maria's breath caught in her throat. The choice, the final line. There was no going back now. She had already crossed too many boundaries, made too many compromises. But now, in this room, she had to decide if she would sacrifice even more. She looked down at the man, her chest tightening as she thought of Leo, her son, the only thing that mattered. She thought of his face, his laughter, his tiny hands reaching up to her, trusting her completely. Could she do this? Could she really go through with it? Her fingers trembled as she reached for the lever on the machine, her mind racing. She wasn't sure what the millionaire wanted her to do, but the fear that coursed through her veins was undeniable. She could feel the weight of her decision, heavy and suffocating. "Do it," the millionaire repeated, his voice growing more insistent. "You don't have time to hesitate. If you want to save your son, you must do this now." She closed her eyes, her heart pounding in her ears. This was it, the moment that would define everything, the moment that would either break her or push her to the point of no return. Taking a deep breath, Maria pulled the lever. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the machines around the man on the table started to beep, their rhythm accelerating. As the man's body began to twitch, Maria stepped back, her heart hammering in her chest. What had she done? What had she just set into motion? The millionaire watched her closely, his eyes gleaming with approval. "Well done, Maria," he said, his voice almost a whisper. "You've passed the test. Now you're ready for what comes next." But Maria wasn't sure if she was ready for anything anymore. The reality of what she had done, what she had agreed to, was crashing down on her. She had crossed the final line, and now there was no way to undo it. The room felt smaller now, the air heavier. Every breath Maria took seemed to echo, reverberating against the stark, sterile walls of the operating room. The man on the table, who had once seemed like a distant stranger, an innocent pawn, was now the center of something far larger than she had ever imagined. His body, hooked up to the machines, continued to twitch, the rhythm of his shallow breathing the only sound in the room. Maria stood frozen in place, her hands trembling at her sides. What had she done? She felt sick. The lever, the choice, the final step. She had crossed every line she had sworn never to cross, and now there was no turning back. Her heart pounded in her chest, every beat a reminder of the price she had paid for her son's future. The millionaire was standing across from her, watching her with a mixture of amusement and cold calculation. His expression didn't change. As the machines continued to beep in the background, "You've done well, Maria," he said, his voice smooth as ever. "I knew you had it in you." She couldn't respond. The words felt foreign to her now. She had done it. She had made the choice to pull the lever, to push the man on the table closer to death, to ensure that she would get what she wanted. But what had she truly gained? What was the cost of all this? "Don't look at me like that," the millionaire said suddenly, as if reading her thoughts. "You knew what you were getting into the moment you walked through my door. You wanted power, you wanted control, and now you have it." Maria's gaze flicked to the man on the table again. His chest heaved with shallow breaths, and his body jerked involuntarily in response to the electrical impulses running through him. She couldn't look away, even though every part of her wanted to. She had made this happen, and now she was forced to face the consequences. "Don't you feel the power?" he asked again, stepping closer to her. "You're in control now, Maria. You made the choice, and with that choice comes something far greater than you could have ever imagined." Maria's stomach turned. She wanted to scream, to run, to tell him that this wasn't what she had signed up for. She had done this for Leo. Everything she had done was for her son. But now she wasn't so sure anymore. What had she become in the process? The millionaire continued speaking, his words dripping with dark promises. "Everything you've ever wanted is within your reach. Power, money, control, the life you've always dreamed of. But it's all about the price you're willing to pay, and you've paid it. Maria shook her head, her eyes tearing away from the man on the table. This isn't what I wanted. I just wanted to save my son. I didn't want this. Her voice broke, and she couldn't continue. The weight of everything she had done felt too much to bear. The millionaire's expression softened just for a moment, as if something flickered behind his eyes. But then it was gone. His mask was back in place, the cold, emotionless face that had dominated every interaction they'd had. Of course, Maria, I understand. You're human. You feel guilty. But you've crossed the threshold now. You've made your decision, and there's no going back. Maria felt her legs give way, and she sank to her knees, the cold tile floor, pressing against her skin. She couldn't look at him anymore. She couldn't look at the man who was slowly dying because of her, the man who had been nothing more than a pawn in the millionaire's twisted game. "You'll get your son's health," the millionaire said softly, stepping closer to her, "but it won't come for free. It never does." Maria's heart raced again, but this time it wasn't with fear. It was with something else, a deep, gnawing realization. She had given up everything, her dignity, her morals, her very soul, all for the promise of something better, something that would save her son. But at what cost? "I don't want it anymore," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I don't want any of it. I just want my son to be okay." The millionaire crouched down beside her, his eyes searching hers, with an almost unreadable expression. For a moment Maria thought she saw a flicker of something, regret, guilt, but it was gone just as quickly as it had appeared. "You can't walk away now, Maria," he said, his voice low and almost pitying. "It's too late for that. You've made your choice, and now you're bound by it. There is no going back." She shook her head, trying to make sense of it all, but her mind was a blur. She had crossed every line, betrayed everything she had ever believed in, for her son, for Leo. But was this really the answer? Was this what it took to secure his future? Suddenly a loud beep filled the room, a warning signal from one of the machines. Maria's eyes snapped to the man on the table. His breathing had stopped. The beeping grew louder, more frantic, and the room seemed to close in around her. "No!" she gasped, scrambling to her feet. "What have I done?" The millionaire stood, his expression unchanged. "It's part of the process," he said, his voice emotionless. "This is what happens when you make decisions like yours." Maria's heart raced as she ran to the man's side, her hands trembling as she reached for the wires and electrodes attached to his body. She didn't know what she was doing. She didn't know if it was too late. She felt the tears streaming down her face as she tried desperately to revive him. But the machines were silent now. His life had slipped away, and all she could do was watch as it ended before her eyes. For the first time, Maria truly understood the full weight of her actions. The price of saving her son had been higher than she could have ever imagined, and now there was nothing left but the emptiness that consumed her. The millionaire didn't move. He just stood there, watching her with cold, detached eyes. "It's over," he said softly, almost as if he were speaking to himself. "The game is finished." Maria collapsed to the ground, her sobs echoing in the silent room. She had lost everything. She had sacrificed so much, and in the end, she had nothing to show for it. The millionaire turned to leave, his footsteps echoing in the cold room. But before he reached the door, he paused and looked back at her one last time. "You'll get your son's health, Maria," he said, his voice low and final. "But the price you've paid is more than you can ever imagine." With that, he was gone. Maria sat there alone in the sterile room, her mind numb. The man on the table was dead. Her son was still sick, and she was left with nothing but the broken pieces of her life. Conclusion: Maria had done the unimaginable. She had crossed every boundary, sacrificed everything for the promise of a better life for her son. But in the end, the price was too high. Her journey had been one of desperation, of hope, and of ultimately losing herself in a world that was beyond her control. The millionaire had taken everything from her, and in return, he had given her nothing. Her son's future was still uncertain. But now, Maria was left to face the consequences of her choices, an empty promise, a shattered soul, and the haunting realization that some things, once broken, could never be repaired. The end.